Today, we're very fortunate. I feel very fortunate, certainly, to have three distinguished leaders here, two from the business community, one from higher education. This is a second in our new series we call Conversations with Global Business Leaders. And today, I think you will agree with me pretty soon. We have some distinguished people, some business leaders who have made their mark. You know, leaders, the vocabulary we use leaders very easily, but to me, one of the things about true leaders is whether or not they have left their mark, whether or not they have been an effective change agent in their organizations. And all three today, you will hear from, have established that their record, left their legacy, left their mark in their environments. And I apologize to all three of you, Ahmet, Galya, and Rich, because my introductions will be very brief so that we can maximize the dialogue time. So please excuse me for being very brief. But Galya, thank you so much for being here with us from Mexico, where you are serving as the president of the Mexico business unit of Coca-Cola. I know you had more than 2 decades of service at this major company that we discuss a lot in our courses because our students like to talk about. But you have certainly have made your mark in terms of Coca-Cola organizations in different positions and different countries. You were responsible for marketing for Coca-Cola Eurasia Group, which included many other important countries. I know Mexico is probably the second largest market for Coca-Cola after the United States, but you were responsible for Russia, Middle East, Central Asia, and other areas. You served as the president of Turkey business unit. And before your current position, you were in Atlanta in senior leadership for global strategy and insights, where you were very instrumental, have been very instrumental in strategy development, global strategic planning process, design and implementation of next generation insights and analytics. And I know you had a career before Coca-Cola at Unilever as well, especially in brand management. I know that you are serving on many advisory boards and philanthropic organizations. I know that you are you are a trustee of the Boğaziçi University Foundation, where you also had your business degree, Bosphorus University in Istanbul. So I will just leave it with that and turn to Ahmet. Ahmet, thank you for joining us also from Turkey. You happen to be in Turkey now. And you serve the company as well with great distinction, most recently as Executive Vice President and President of Coca-Cola International. In this position, you were responsible for all units of the company outside of North America. So that certainly was a major responsibility you fulfilled. And you started your Coca-Cola tour as a financial controller, manager in Atlanta. So you do have Atlanta backgrounds, and I'm very proud to say that you're also one of our alumni, Robinson College of Business alumni, where you obtained your Master's of Science degree in Information Systems. And soon after that, I think you started working at Coopers & Lybrand is in audit and consultancy and management roles as well. But certainly before your responsibility as the president international for Coca-Cola, you were the president of Eurasia and Africa division, which includes some 90 countries, several continents. So that's definitely a major responsibility you fulfilled as well. I'm also proud that we have something in common. in terms of our alma mater. You were a graduate of Middle East Technical University in Ankara, that I also earned my undergraduate degree. So you have also and have been serving in many advisory boards and voluntary organizations. I remember your leadership in the certainly American-Turkish Friendship Council in Atlanta, founding member of the Coca-Cola Turkey Life Plus Foundation, and leadership in several business councils, such as Brazil, US Business Council, Pakistan, US Business Council, Turkey, US Business Council. And folks do know you in the company as a mentor, as a change agent, as a strategic thinker, and a compassionate leader. So thank you for being here with us, Ahmet. And I'll turn to Rich. Rich Phillips is the 7th Dean of the Robinson College of Business at Georgia State, our fearless leader. And one thing I will say about Rich, in 6 short years, he has transformed a very large college, one of the largest business schools in the country. But that's not necessarily something we brag about. We talk about being in the forefront of change in business, and Rich certainly has fulfilled that role. He's transformed our college and brought us to a contemporary age, certainly with a new focus on analytics, on entrepreneurship, on innovation, and other areas. So he certainly has been a major change agent at Georgia State University. Of course, Rich has his scholarship, very successful scholarship in risk management and in insurance. He, in fact, is the holder of the CV Star Professor of Risk Management and Insurance. He has more than 50 scholarly papers, publications, and received many research awards and teaching awards as well. Rich is a corporate director at Munich American Reassurance Corporation, senior consultant with Charles River Associates, and past president of their society, academic society, American Risk and Insurance Association, and also Risk Theory Society, and a trustee of the Hubner Foundation, and board member for many organizations, including the SWIFT School, a private school serving dyslexic children in Georgia. So with that, thank you, Galya, thank you, Ahmet, and thank you, Rich, for being here. We've asked Rich to moderate this discussion. I hope you will enjoy it. And there is, Hannah mentioned, there's an opportunity for you to make comments and ask questions. We'll leave some time at the end of our dialogue this morning to that. So use the Q&A function for your comments and questions. So I'll turn it to you, Rich.
Thank you, Tamir, and thank you for those very generous introductions. I'm very happy to be here with Ahmet and Galya today, two just wonderful world-class leaders, and this should be a wonderful, fantastic hour that we get to spend together. So why don't we just jump right in? Galya and Ahmet, Tamir just touched briefly on your corporate careers. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the businesses that you're in today, give a little bit of background for the audience, just briefly, so we have a little bit of context on the organizations in which you're involved today. And then we'll talk a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted those organizations. So Galya, why don't I start with you?
Surely, thank you, Rich. Thank you, Tamer Hocam, for the gracious introduction. Well, let me talk a little bit about Mexico. I have taken over the business at the very beginning of 2019. And Mexico is one of the largest operations that we have as the Coca-Cola Company globally. We have, as our partners, we have the biggest bottlers, actually, again, the biggest global bottlers like FEMSA, ARCA, and we also have private bottlers. So it's an interesting business because it goes back to back for 94 years. So it's been 94 years since, like, you know, the first Coca-Cola has been sold in Mexico. And in terms of the partners that we have, some of them, not all of them, but some of them have been there for almost 90 years. So therefore they bring this whole heritage. We serve 1 million small stores in Mexico. That also, like, you know, brings a difference, if you like, because these small stores are really the heart of the Mexican economy. And particularly as we're going to be talking about COVID and everything, it's so critical for them to survive this period. One other thing that I might talk about, like, you know, from the Mexican standpoint, we have 90,000 people working for the system. And the portfolio is a large one. It includes obviously all the core sparkling, our core beverages, but it also has plant-based beverages. It also has a dairy business, strong juice business, etc. So it's really, like, you know, a large portfolio. And just as an addition, like, you know, to what I do for Mexico, I'm also leading the digital transformation for Latin America, which added a different perspective, if you like, to what I do on a daily basis. So that's about it, more or less. Rich, back to you.
Great. I know that Coca-Cola has about, if I understand it correctly, about 50% of the market share in Mexico. In the soft drink market, so it's the dominant player in that marketplace.
It's
is that right?
Close to 50% in non-alcoholic beverages. We're higher in terms of soft drinks.
Ahmet, what businesses are you in today?
Yes, and I also want to thank everyone for the gracious introductions. My role in all of the businesses I'll talk about are non-executive roles, either through formal board positions or advisory board positions. So this was amazing for me to look at the impact of the pandemic in different areas, but I have two roles in FMCG. Actually, one of them is a Coke bottler that's in the US and in Hong Kong. Another FMCG, a sort of a coffee business here in the US. Then I have involvement with an e-commerce company, a private equity company, a real estate company, and those private equity and real estate companies have both have local businesses there in Turkey and also international businesses, and a venture capital arm of the same two. But it's also interesting, you know, if we want to talk about it, I'm involved in a couple of philanthropic activities, and it was quite interesting to see the effect of the pandemics on the philanthropic side of the economy as well. And and the private equity obviously gives you a peek into a lot of different sectors. From tech to fintech to healthcare services, education, airlines, pharmacies. Obviously, you know, you're not able to see the impact of the pandemics on a great level of detail from a private equity lens, but you can still sort of see enough things to start seeing patterns and themes in what happens.
So let's explore some of those, Ahmet. Maybe we'll start wide and then drill down a little bit. So what are some of the broad themes and patterns that it is that you're seeing, both across sectors and maybe across the world?
Yeah, you know, it just looks to me like, by the way, everything we talk about is like the virus itself. You know, we just don't know, and we learn as we go. Yeah. And really, it actually, if you're a company or a person, it doesn't matter. you can get through it mildly, or it can kill you. So I think the impact is the same whether it's a person or a company. So in general, this is what I've seen is, if you were weak as a person or as a company, you are impacted more severely. And that weakness is really more in the basics of the business. It could be like, if you already have good leadership, good culture, already an agile, nimble business, you're going to get through more easily. But if you had significant structural problems with respect to those, you're going to suffer. And then there were the usual suspects of the sectors, or the sectors within the industry. Like if you're in travel, leisure, entertainment, some of the retail, you're going to get impacted. But if you actually step back, I don't want to name the specific companies, but what I saw among the businesses that I have been involved in, the ones who are impacted severely were the absolute minority. So out of let's say 15 businesses, 1 or 2 would be impacted severely in the sets that I've looked at. About the rest is half and half between mild and moderate. And what I mean by that is, a mild impact is you felt a fairly big decline in your sales, but then you had a V-shaped, fairly quick comeback to, let's say, 85 to 95% of your prior year sales. Of course, in our pre-COVID environment, that's a bad thing because you want to grow. Right. Okay, so I give that, but I still call that mild to moderate. Yeah, the more moderate ones are, you're having cash flow problems. You just have to, you get close to a matter of life versus death, but you sort of get through. That's been my, yeah. So just to give you one example, the e-commerce company, we have 2 concerns. We're growing more than 100%, but are we losing market share? That's the kind of game the e-commerce business is playing. But then there's also an airline business. Do we have enough cash to get through the next few months so that we can be back in business, because there's a strong brand that when the business goes back up, it goes. So that's really what it is. It just looks like the rocks are moving in the overall industry. And the net is there is a bit of a decline. But of course, we don't know if there's a second, third wave and that's coming and how that affects everything. That's unknown. But up to this point, that's been my observations.
I think if I could summarize to make sure I got all of it, I think as you scan across the sectors, there's sort of a sector effect that the virus has, which is sort of a, let's call it a fixed effect on that sector. But when you look at the companies inside that sector, then it starts to become much more about the culture, the position in that sector, the balance sheet in that sector, the leadership of that organization. And that really drives much more to the heterogeneity that you see inside that sector. Yep. Well, it comes down to good leadership, which is what this session is about at the end of the day. Galya, I was struck by your comment and what was top of mind for you about these 1 million stores that you distribute to and that distribute your product, and how top of mind that is for you, that they survive in this pandemic. I was wondering if you could talk about just, in your world, how important are those stores, and what else has been important as you manage through the pandemic for Coca-Cola Mexico?
Yeah, you're right. It's very much top of mind for me and for the Mexican team, because this is really bread and butter for us and for the Mexican economy. maybe building on what Ahmet Bey said, so taking a little bit of a higher stand before I go into the mom and pop stores, what we have seen in our own sector is exactly what Ahmet Bey is talking about. If you're really strong with your brand, if you're strong in execution in the marketplace, then even though, like, you know, there might be a little bit of a some impact, obviously everyone is impacted, but the impact is relatively limited. So that was, like, you know, one of the learnings that we had. The other big learning that we had is that obviously for our own sector, the lockdowns, and I will tie it to the mom and pop stores, the lockdowns and how severe these lockdowns are have impacted the business. The more people are at home, obviously, the more changes we saw to their consumption habits. And there's a lot of consumer behavior change that we have seen. So we have, in talking about Mexico and dialing into your question, we have 1 million mom and pop stores. These are not the taquerias. Taquerias are different, and I'm going to talk about it. The 1 million stores are really on home consumption. This is why it is so much, like, you know, in my radar. What happened is that as out of home basically lost the business because of the situation, the home consumption still continued. The problem with these stores was that they didn't have any hygiene condition. They didn't, if they didn't have the traffic, majority of them, because of their financials, could go out of business. So there was a huge vulnerability, like, you know, for that. So therefore, as the Coca-Cola system, and not only the system, but also working together with some other competitors and snacks companies, like, you know, not direct competitors, but with other companies, let's say, who are serving these stores, we started, like, you know, we put together a microcredit program. We put together a huge, really fairly sizable hygiene program. We also gave them the disinfectants, the materials that they could protect themselves from. And we started a program to get traffic into these stores, talking to people that it's good that you go ahead and get your supplies from your corner stores, from the store in your neighborhood. And we talked about my store safe, my store open. So therefore there was a huge, like, you know, focus on getting them back to work. And we succeeded. So today, 98% of these stores are fully functioning, and they are growing. And that's again, I mean, we did a lot on that one, obviously, as the system, but we also were collaborating with some other companies, which I think is one of the wins of this period. So I love this concept of co-opetition, because no matter if you're, it doesn't matter if you're competing for the same cause, you can actually collaborate. Yeah, so that's, and in fact, like, you know, maybe one last thing, Rich, in fact, we also were able to work with the government on that, because it's also important for the governments that the small stores, the small entrepreneurs are healthy. So that there was also another carrot, right, like, you know, for the government for this. Yeah.
Yeah, aligning the incentives across all of those groups. Absolutely. Sounds like a win for across all of those. I'm curious. So this is a shock, an economic shock caused by a public health crisis this time. We've seen other shocks in the economy before. The last major one was a liquidity shock caused in 2008. We can go back and digest where other economic shocks have happened. You all have been in business long enough to have worked yourselves through several of these shocks. How is this one different? And how are you managing it differently? And how is this one similar to other shocks that you've managed before?
First of all, I think there is a huge difference versus other shocks that we have had, and that's about the environment. So this COVID, the pandemic happened at a time when technology is taking over. So even when we talk about the mom and pop stores, the big leap that we have been working on is how to digitize them, because there's absolutely no way that any industry, any customer for us can really survive without upgrading their digital capabilities. So therefore, going back to your question in terms of how this is different, number one, the environment technology is completely different. This impacted the whole channel dynamics, the sales channel dynamics. The customers were deeply impacted. And it has, the entire supply chain was impacted.
Ahmet, same question to you. How is this pandemic different?
Yes,
is this a shock, and how is it the same?
Yeah, I'll try to build on Galya's without replicating. But what really hit me was that if anybody in the audience is born after 1920, which I think is a pretty safe bet, that there's no one born, we've never seen anything like this. So the last pandemic, I think, was in 1918, like the Spanish flu.
Right, yep.
So, and obviously, even if we did, the extent of globalization and how, resources, people, money move around the world, it certainly wasn't what we had before the pandemic. So, so what it did differently from everything else is it brought about a substantial change in lifestyle. So if you compare it to 2007 and 8, that didn't change the lifestyle substantially. It was a financial crisis. Or if you had the Asian crises, or if you go back further, they never changed the lifestyle in such a substantial way. Then I think we kept talking about after the crisis in a different way. In the previous crises, what we would say is let's emerge stronger after the crisis. Yes, but we're talking about after the crisis being very different than the world before the crisis. I think that was certainly different. The one that makes it even more complicated, I think, is that Galya mentioned this. This pandemic converged with two other global things happening. One, obviously, is the acceleration of technology, and it accelerated that. That people had to adopt technology more quickly now. And that in and of itself is quite unique, because I don't think any time in the history of humanity have we had so many technologies advancing at an exponential rate, and then like 8 or 9 of them converging in different ways to change lives. So that in and of itself was a huge change. And then this comes and it converges with that. And then I think it converges with another geopolitical trend, which I guess time will show that, whether it is that it's the rise of China. And if COVID was any indicator, China has been successful in dealing with this pandemic. They stopped it quickly, they recovered quickly, and the countries that sort of are the epicenters of the world's economic and political doctrine, free markets and free people, they have done terribly. Western Europe and the US have done terribly. So is this converging with some change in the balances of power in the world? So there's just too much going on. And first time, if I was an executive, I wouldn't estimate, I wouldn't project anything. I wouldn't say there are 3 scenarios and I'm going to be prepared for each of these scenarios. I wouldn't say that. I would just say, okay, what trends that I'm seeing that are important, and I'm not going to miss that. Obviously, I'm going to prepare my business for the future, but I wouldn't take a bet on how things would go. So net, I'd say it is a much more uncertain, a much more whole-scale change for the world. And there is so much more at stake that if we don't deal with this, so it's like the virus. It can kill you. That's what it's at stake. Or if you have the antibodies, you can get very strong. So there are few things are the same, I think. And that's really, I thought about this, it's more at the principle level of how you deal with a crisis. You know, at the end of the day, this is a crisis. If you're caught strongly in it, you're fine. If you're not, you're not. And then the solutions, principally, are the same. You know, I'd like to use the word, you know, preserve and strengthen your system. What that means is your suppliers, your customers, as Galya mentioned, her bottlers, and you know, whatever your ecosystem is, you have to preserve that. To do that, you have to collaborate, you have to communicate, you have to manage your psyche, all of that. I don't think those are any different in any other. It's the same, but it's just with a lot more uncertainty and a lot more at stake. So it sort of tests your stamina. Are you strong enough to deal with all of that? Yeah, and maybe cash flow probably for certain sectors has become such heightened level of importance that might not have been in the previous crises.
Each of you are you know, a couple of decades into your careers and have had significant leadership roles. And as you develop as a leader, you develop a leadership philosophy that you've applied and clearly had success with over the years. In the last 6 to 8 months, you've had to put that leadership philosophy to test. Has this leadership test taught you anything about your leadership philosophy? Have you learned anything new about yourself as a leader through this? Or do you feel like your philosophy has, you know, stood the test of this particular episode? What have you learned new about yourself as a leader? Ahmet, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Rich. I think my first learning was that what I thought I learned, I haven't learned. And that was, I know that, you know, managing your own psyche is the most important thing. You got to start inside out, as Galya said very well. You got to start with yourself. But I have to admit that I had like probably a week's time, maybe more. My brain was in overdrive. My emotions were completely suppressed during the day because I was busy, and they were completely hurtful once I became less busy. And that basically put me in a bad space. I was running from things to things, and because there's just so much to think about, right? And that took me about a week. So I just learned that I haven't learned what I said was important, which is managing your own psyche. But that was good. At least I've learned some to sort of step back and reinstitute new routines for myself. And obviously, once you're aware of that, I think it's easy to get. That was my first learning. And, you know, we'll just keep getting tested on this, and we'll see if we learned it this time so that you can seamlessly go through it. I learned that, you know, there was an incredible productivity opportunity. I was able to attend things that I wasn't able to attend before because I'm not traveling anymore. In pre-COVID, I was traveling about half the time. Because I wasn't traveling anymore, that gave me just so much time to plan and be disciplined and be productive about. But then I learned something that's very interesting, which is so important. I thought about it and chose the words, it's the loss of impromptu connections. And I think for any leader, that has huge value. So because your life is disciplined and you're just in your room, in your home, and you're being very productive with whatever you do, but you're not having unplanned impromptu interactions with people. And when you do, actually somebody says something, it connects to something else, you actually broaden your horizon, you get much richer in your thinking. And I learned that muscle was sort of not muscle, but that input was actually being lost. And I'm thinking now how you can do that. Maybe you need to be more diverse in the types of things you attend and the people you keep in touch with. But yeah, as with anything else, it had its pluses and minuses. But I really feel grateful for having experienced such a period.
It is a remarkable period, that's for sure. And back to your first point about the week or 10 days that you had, where you had to relearn a lesson you've already say that you've experienced before. I think we call that the human experience, Ahmet. Galya, how about for you?
For me, what I learned was equally important with what I unlearned. I'm by background, by development, I'm a very disciplined, process-oriented person. And this whole situation, I mean, what kind of process can you implement, for God's sake? So it's like, it completely everything that I knew about the way I was doing business, I had to throw it away. So therefore, this whole, the way I was doing it was really, you set a strategy, you put your resources, and then you plan and you execute. Done. That's what I have learned in my 30 years of experience, But this time we couldn't do it. So I said, okay, well, that's something that we need to delete in my DNA. So therefore, the way I approached it actually was principle versus strategy. So for the first 100 days, we had a set of principles, and then we evolved them. So we had another set of principles for the next, as we started, the next 100 days. But it was really truly, so everything was based on these principles: the resource allocation, where we were spending time, what we were focusing on. So all of a sudden, principles became much more important. So that was the big change that I had to make in my mind. The second, big thing was that starting with myself, and Ahmet, they said it so well, the whole human centricity became very critical. And think about the culture that we have in Mexico. Obviously, it's very, very human oriented. People want to touch each other. People want to see each other. And all of a sudden, in 12 hours time, on March 17th, to be exact, we became a virtually run, company. So therefore, the human centricity, I had to really dial it up. So what happened is that on a daily basis, I had my town halls every day, every single day for 100 days, until we saw that we were starting getting used to that, and those daily check-ins were not needed anymore. But for the first 100 days, I think it was very important. So I really had to dial that up. And that brought new habits into my life, because if you spend so much time talking to people and everything, then you have to let other things. So that brought me the reprioritization And those principles really helped in that, like, reprioritization.
Mhm.
I really pushed myself, like, another learning was that I really pushed myself into providing clarity, because I knew that I couldn't provide any certainty. Everything was getting obsolete, like, the day after. So that clarity versus certainty really is another item for me. And finally, that's probably the biggest thing that I learned as a person, as a human being, actually. I said, there's nothing that I can lose in this environment. I mean, everything is upside down anyway. So let me try new stuff. And I have a great team, who really embraced it. And what we did are things that I would never have had the courage to do.
Right.
You see, so that was my thinking.
Never waste a crisis. Exactly.
We have,
thank you for that.
we have about 10 minutes left, unfortunately. I have a question for both of you, Galya and Ahmet. I'll get to Galya first, but Ahmet, if you can think about one question that we have one of our participants. We have a lot of young people, including students. We have an MBA student. As you know, the anxiety that Galya talked about is very widespread. And she's asking, what do I do in order to make myself more successful in the job market down the road? What kind of activities would be helpful to me? How do I develop my professional skill set and perhaps build the resilience that I need so that I can be successful post-COVID? If you can think about that. Galya, I'd like to turn to you first. A lot of people in our audience are international business educators, teachers, and obviously we talk a lot about global business and how countries make a difference. How, since you worked in so many different countries, when you go from one country to another, what is it that you do the same as well as different in terms of your leadership style, perhaps, or how you communicate and marshal your team members? Do you make some adjustments? This would be interesting to hear from you, Galya.
That's a very good question. It's kind of difficult to give any advice or anything on this matter, because I can only talk about what has worked for me. Everything is situational, I believe. But what has worked for me is really start with gratitude, start with appreciation, start with understanding the language, the culture. Really embracing it and enjoying it wherever I worked really worked for me. So that's usually the first step, always, that has been the first step for me. And then as one starts getting that understanding, then it becomes also easy to relate to people, to understand. But what I have found also very helpful is that I always have people, not friends, some of them are friends, but not necessarily friends, but confides, people that I trust, who can tell me about, as an example, let me give you an example. Look, breakfasts, as we know, as a social occasion, are big in my country. Okay, so I grew up like that. So if you have any social interaction, you call people for breakfast. I went to Mexico, and I was telling people, we're going to do this great breakfast, and we're going to talk about whatever. And somebody, one of those confides, basically reached out to me. And he said, you know what? In Mexico, breakfast is something when your mom wants to talk about something very serious with you. So you better start talking and getting adjusted to luncheons. And I said, okay, fine then, you know, I'm giving just a small example, but it's like that. So it's, so it became luncheons then. So it starts with appreciation.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Galya. Ahmet, if we can hear from you, I mean, you spend a lot of time and mentor a lot of people. I mean, you certainly mentored many executives within the company and outside the company as well. What kind of advice do you have for young people today who need to have a more positive outlook towards the future and remain optimistic?
I first have to start recognizing that this is probably one of the most difficult times for young people starting their careers. I do recognize that, and it might even get more difficult. Who knows? But you know, at the end of the day, it always evolves. It always evolves, and I have a belief that it just moves forward. So it's not difficult to have a less of an optimistic or more of a pessimistic outlook about your chances. It's very easy to have that in this point in time, but it really isn't. It may be a matter of time, because as we've shared the examples of businesses, some are thriving. We're only hearing the bad news get accentuated so much more, and the fear factor and all of that. My first advice would be, please, please, please don't let that get to you. I think if you can have an authentic assumption inside, which says that, yeah, there'll be difficult times, but you know, I have 50, 60, 70 years in front of me, and this would be a blip and it will change things. We don't know exactly how, but the best thing I can do is to prepare myself for it. So what is that prep? So that psyche is so important. Just like we talked about, you start with your own psyche. Ask yourself that question. Am I predominantly thinking negatively about this? And be very honest. And if not, have some self-convincing that, which I think is warranted. At the end of the day, things will move forward, and the strong ones will get their career started. So get yourself to be strong. So I'd say that's number one, a self-convincing of that. Second one I would say is probably being more flexible than you were before. So if you say, well, I just want to stay in Atlanta, or I just want to be in New York. No, I think the whole country, or in fact, sometimes maybe the whole world. But if you're in the United States, I'd say the whole country, you should be open for opportunities, and that would be my second. Then is how do you position yourself for the winners, the winning industries? So if you still have time, even 6 months, and if you're not really really strong in tech, whether it's fintech or martech or e-commerce, or if you're not in that genre, I would do everything possible to get myself up to speed. And you can. One of the things about this is that this was one of the things that amazed me to see in the e-commerce company that I've seen. Between 2 board meetings, the amount of progress that I've seen was the amount of progress we wanted to make in 2 years. And I think this is happening. If you actually tap into technology, and if you just change the way you think, change the way you work, you can actually really accelerate your learning. And that's something we all have to do. So use that to position yourself well for the winners. And certainly all the tech companies, startups even, and maybe things like logistics, delivery, all of that. And if you sort of dig more, you can find out. But be targeted about what you want to get. Then there's always the question of, should I go into my own business? I guess a lot of people I know started businesses during the pandemic. I think that's certainly fine, as long as you have the right dynamics. So if you've been working on an idea, if you think the idea has legs, if you think you have the right financing, if you think you have the right people with you, etc., maybe you got all the stars lined up. Just go for it, you know. But if it's just a dream, you just have an idea yesterday, that may not necessarily be a good idea. So, yeah, and as Galya said, you know, there's hardly you can have advice that has huge chance of success, but those sort of seem like the sensible things to be thinking about.
And I want to harken back to something that we talked about earlier to the advice for students here, which is something that Ahmet stated, which is that for there's a lot of, or as a reminder to students, for every student that is thinking about what it is they're going to do next, there are a set of people that have exited the labor market who are not coming back as a result of this pandemic. And there are a set of companies who have right now kind of thinned out their ranks, who are waiting for the pandemic to end, that when the economy picks back up again, they will be looking to hire. And they will be looking to hire the next generation of talent who has been implementing all of the digital strategies and the next generation of way of working that Galya and Ahmet have been talking about as part of this conversation we've been having today. And so there's going to be fantastic opportunities for those that are investing in their human capital today, that when this labor market picks back up, are going to be perfectly positioned to re-enter into that labor market. So right now, while things are kind of in a little bit of a pause for those industries that are not doing as well, and for those industries that are doing well, but not really hiring because they're still kind of waiting for this thing to break, this is a fantastic time to be in school and getting those skills so that when this thing turns, the world is your oyster. And we saw exactly that same thing happen in the financial crisis back in 08, 09. And those students that were in school and had the right skills when this thing came out in 08, 2010, 2011, that's exactly what happened to their careers. So I'm very optimistic for students that are coming back to school right now.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you, Ahmet. Thank you, Galya, again. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you all. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Galya, Ahmet, thank you very much for your time today. I enjoyed moderating this session. We're working with all of you. Tamir, thank you for setting this up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.